So the Wall Street Journal is reporting that many CEOs are having a hard time picking between the candidates. Many of them who had supported Trump in the past are nervous about a few things, like tariffs. But at the same time, they don't feel like Kamala Harris will be a better alternative for them because few expect her to embrace Wall Street, and she most likely shouldn't. But many are worried about how she would manage the Federal Trade Commission. That is Lina Khan, who, when you hear from CEO after CEO, they're afraid of Lina Khan. They don't like what she's doing in the world of M&A. Joining me now to discuss, James Surowiecki, contributing writer for Inc., Fast Company, and The Atlantic. James, what do you think about this report from the Journal? I get it. If you're a Fortune 500 CEO, you love deregulation and you love tax cuts. But Donald Trump is offering you a whole lot more unpredictability that's nerve-wracking for them.
I think that's actually the really important part. And the article only talked about that a little bit. I think the loose cannon factor is a big part of what makes CEOs nervous about Trump. You really don't know exactly what he's going to do in terms of, well, any kind of policy, but certainly in terms of economic policy. And I do think that Trump essentially sees the world as basically in terms of deals and in terms of sort of personal favors. So, he's really trying to essentially cut arrangements with different kinds of companies. And I think it's generally not something that, say, Fortune 500 companies want. What they want is some kind of stability, some sort of regulatory certainty. As you said, look, Fortune 500 companies are going to be biased toward Republicans because they like deregulation and they like tax cuts. But I think Trump really does not really deliver in a lot of ways what Fortune 500 CEOs want from a president.
Well, Mark Cuban, a business leader, outspoken critic, obviously, of Donald Trump, was on The Daily Show last night talking about sort of this groundswell of support Donald Trump has been getting from Silicon Valley. And Cuban gave his explanation as to why. Watch this.
Watching what's happened in Silicon Valley is insane. Right. It's not so much a support thing, it's more like a takeover thing. Trying to put themselves in a position to have as much control as possible. They want Trump to be the CEO of the United States of America, and they want to be the board of directors that makes him listen to them.
James, I've heard the same thing from sources. People have said to me that Elon Musk will be like a shadow president. He doesn't want a cabinet position. He wants to be Darth Vader waiting in the wings, orchestrating whatever he wants when and if Donald Trump is the president. And that's why a whole lot of other business leaders are doing the same. What do you think?
It's interesting. I mean, I do think that the number of Silicon Valley CEOs or venture capitalists who have kind of flocked to Trump in the last couple of months it's still relatively small, but there are some very high profile people who have done it. And I do think Cuban is on to something. I think people see Trump as someone who is influenceable, in part because he doesn't necessarily have really established policy vision, and that's especially true of things like AI, right? Like Trump doesn't really know anything about AI or what he wants AI to be, and so I think that there are venture capitalists and CEOs who are saying, look, if we can support him and get behind him, then we can actually really shape what he's going to do. But I will say one thing: I do feel as if there was a kind of groundswell of support when people thought that Trump was guaranteed to win. That is to say, when Biden was still in the race. And I would be surprised if there aren't some people who are saying to themselves, oh, this may not have been the smartest decision. Because let me just say one other thing. The Trump administration and Republicans generally have actually been quite hostile to a lot of Silicon Valley and certainly social media and internet companies generally, passing laws, trying to ban social media companies from being able to manage their own content and the like. So it's not as if he's this great friend.
Good morning. It is 10 o'clock Eastern. Great to have you with us. I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York. And this morning, a clear swing state split screen is now emerging. Former President Trump hitting the campaign trail for the first time this week after allies expressed frustration at the slow pace of his stump appearances since the shakeup in the race. This afternoon, Trump will hold a rally in North Carolina. Now, Vice President Kamala Harris will campaign there on Friday. And then on Sunday, she'll join her running mate, Tim Walz, for a battleground bus tour in Pennsylvania after Trump's return to that state. So they're kind of crisscrossing here. Some brand new polling from the Cook Political Report shows why the candidates are eyeing these battlegrounds. Take a look at this. Among 7 key states here, Harris now leads Trump by 1 point. That's within the margin of error. But when you zoom in on the specific states, you see serious movement. North Carolina, an 8-point swing toward Harris. Michigan, +5 since May. Pennsylvania, 4-point swing to Harris. And this survey was taken before Harris picked her running mate and all the momentum that seemed to bring. NBC News correspondents Janice Alcindor and Von Hilliard are covering the campaigns. Also with us, former Obama 2012 campaign manager Jim Messina and former senior Republican congressional advisor Rena Shaw. So, Von, Trump back on the trail today, facing some heat from Republicans for his light campaign schedule. What do we know?
Right. He had a campaign event in Montana last Friday night, but that is where today it is notable. He is going to Asheville, North Carolina for a campaign rally. And then on Saturday, he's going to be in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. But you looked at those 7 states, right? I mean, the Trump campaign had been talking about New Hampshire being in play, Virginia being in play. And this is the difficult part for a campaign less than 3 months out, is suddenly you're working with upwards of 9 potentially battleground states, and you have to pick not only where do you spend your time, but also spend your resources. And when you compare it to the Democratic side with their ticket appearing with down ballot candidates, there are Senate candidates. If you take North Carolina, there's their gubernatorial candidate who right now has lower polling numbers than Donald Trump. There is a lot that is taking place within the Republican Party right now about not only Donald Trump's use of time and where he's appearing, but also the extent to which he appears or does not appear with some of these down ballot candidates in the extent like Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick, the Senate candidate. Will we see him there on Saturday alongside Donald Trump on stage? There is a lot right now that the Trump campaign is going through.
So many moving parts. The polls are moving. The candidates are on the move. Yamiche Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, will stump in Pennsylvania Sunday, as we mentioned. Walz has sharpened his attacks on the GOP ticket in his solo appearances this week. What will we see from them in the coming days?
What we're going to see, especially from Governor Walz, is him just really sharpening, as you said, these attacks. What Harris was looking for in a running mate was not just someone who was going to govern and be ready for president, but also
that have happened with crime. What do you make of his response, and whether or not you think Kamala Harris should be changing her tact?
Well, we do know her last name. It is Harris, and her first name is Kamala, as you pronounced correctly, Sarah, but she continues to intentionally mispronounce, or maybe just not smart enough to remember how to say her name. Nonetheless, look, we know immigration is an important issue, and it is something that the Democrats are going to have to address. But we also know border crossings are down under the Biden-Harris administration, lower than they were when Trump left office. We also know that there was a bipartisan bill that, but for Donald Trump, would have been signed to deal with some of these issues. But I want to address something else, is that I'm not sure if you showed the picture, but Donald Trump recently released a meme that had pictures of African immigrants, Black African immigrants in this country. And he
Allison,
does this
hold on
as
one
a type
second.
of
Let's put that up while you're talking about it. This is what he put out here. Take a look at that picture. It really gives you a sense of where his head is at. Talk about that, his campaign and him pushing that out.
Now, it's not that immigration is not an important issue, but it's the way that Donald Trump talks about it. He talks about them being S-hole countries, or he talks about them being immigrants being rapists and murderers. And it's othering. It's trying to make voters and Americans feel scared of immigrants coming to our country, when in reality, most of the folks who are in America are because they have an immigrant story, their families coming from Europe. And so Donald Trump has a tactic right now that is not surprising, because it's a part of his tactic, but he's doing these things with racial undertones and saying, like, in a Kamala Harris presidency, all these Black immigrants and African immigrants and Haitian immigrants are going to come into your country, and do you want that? And you should be afraid. And so it doesn't appear that scare tactics really work in elections, but it is right out of the Trump playbook. And I would hope that their campaign would behave better. If you want to talk about the issues, great. But using imagery to try and invoke fear is pretty ruthless politics.
Essie, does it work? because we see a lot of ads that do just exactly what Allison is saying, use scare tactics.
I wish it didn't, but fear works real well, actually, as a motivator. And that's on both sides, have sort of fear-mongered traditionally and historically. But I've always said there's a good way and a bad way to say anything. And there are good ways to talk about immigration, the migrant crisis, crime in our cities. This isn't one of them. But let me just add a note to this. It's also what the Trump campaign is not talking about. There's some real low-lying fruit, low-hanging fruit over on the Harris-Walz campaign that they're just ignoring. Minnesota, for example, Tim Walz's state, has a no-week restriction on abortion. That places it well outside where a majority of Americans are. Minnesota also has one of the highest income taxes of any state in the union. Go after that. Can we have a riff or a meme on that once in a while? But they just seem to want to stay with litigating Harris's race, calling out Walz's military service record, calling her dumb and stupid and mispronouncing her name. This is not a campaign. That's a crisis of confidence. That's not knowing where to go or what to do.
S.E. Cupp joining the chorus of Republicans trying to get Trump to change tact. Ashley, Allison, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on this morning.
So, guys, what you're seeing is everybody abandon Donnie when he needs them most, right? He's got some buddies, they're CEOs, big business owners, members of Congress, the fellow members of Congress, big conservative movement people, and they love hanging out with Trump when he's winning. And Donald loves hanging out with them when they can give him money and give him access to power. Remember, there's no actual friendship here, like they're friends. It's all transactional. But right now, Donnie has no friends because he's losing again. He lost all of his friends right after January 6th and he got kicked out of office. And then he gradually started to get them back because he got the GOP nomination and he was looking okay in the polls when Biden was in. But now that it's him versus Kamala, 1v1, and Kamala is, frankly, guys, like not to be too crude, kicking the utter crap out of him up and down Pennsylvania Avenue and everywhere else. It's just brutal. He's losing his friends. You see there, CEOs who should love Trump. Many of them like him somewhat because he gives them tax cuts. He's now BFFs with Elon, of all people. Two monsters hanging out. But they don't like him because fundamentally, even though Democratic policies are generally a little bit harder on corporations, one, mainstream Democrats are still very, very, very pro-big business. We gotta understand that. There's a bipartisan consensus in favor of the 1%. But they're less so, and they're worried about the maniac Trump. They might not like Kamala. They might not like the Democrats. But if you have a business and it's going okay right now, do you want to put a literal buffoon, idiot in charge and roll the dice? Maybe it's better, but it could be a heck of a lot worse. And now you see Republican Congress people not want to hang out with Trump anymore. They're ignoring him. You see that high profile Republicans do not want to be seen with Trump. They did a few weeks ago when he was high in the polls, but not now. So golf buddies all over the place are ditching him, and he doesn't like it.